Hello, welcome
This
again
is
to the
it.
Innovative Learning Environment and Student Experience Scoping Study. This video is an update on our progress to date with a specific focus on Workshop 2 findings. The ILESE Scoping Study has three driving questions. Where has existing research led us? What is the critical research that must be done? And how should such research be designed? In Workshop 1, we focus primarily on the first question, gathering the citations of research we currently use. We also use the discussions between team members to feed back some initial ideas about what educators, academics, and industry feel are the research gaps in their sector. In Workshop 2, we aim to gather more concrete evidence on question 2, what gaps in research must be addressed? Having used the Workshop 1 discussions to identify 20 research gaps that exist, the aim of Workshop 2 was to begin ranking these gaps to determine priority areas for future research. It is this ranking of gaps that will be the focus of today's video. This is the overall ranking based on the full data set. Evaluation of learning environments, the design of ILEs, and their impact on student engagement remain a priority for participants, as identified across both workshops. Affective learning outcomes, sometimes referred to as 21st century learning skills, and health and well-being rounded out the top 5. It is important to note that we created a scaled frequency for this analysis so that each sector, academe, education, and industry, had equal say in determining the priorities on this list. In this analysis, it was evident that there are some different priorities for each sector. Often 2 sectors ranked a gap more highly than the third. We also explored how much the frequencies ranged, shown on the right-hand side of the list. This showed greater consensus on gaps such as affective learning outcomes and health and well-being, and greater differences between how the sectors ranked issues such as student engagement. Consequently, we explored the top 5 priorities for each sector separately to see where differences lie. Academics had equal frequencies for 3rd and 5th place on their list. While many of their top 5 are the same as the overall list, they also prioritised inclusiveness and teaching. They were the only sector to include teaching in their top 5, and the only sector to not include student engagement. Education had the most representation of all the sectors in the second workshop, and a much wider distribution of frequencies across individuals' top 5 than the other sectors. Education showed some differences in their priority list compared to the overall list, with academic learning outcomes and inclusiveness featuring in their sector list. They more frequently discussed the need for a study that links ILEs to academic learning outcomes to provide evidence for the increased investment in ILE builds. Both inclusiveness and health and well-being made it into their top 5, with their reasoning showing they are interested in ensuring ILEs cater for a diverse range of students. Industry was the only sector to prioritise hybrid learning environments. However, there was greater consistency between the industry responses and the overall list in terms of what they rank as their top 5. In addition to the sectors, we also explored priority areas through geographical analysis. The geographies analysis shows a high degree of consistency with the sector analysis. The 4 main priorities, affective learning outcomes, design of ILE spaces, evaluation of learning environments, and impact on student engagement are 4 of the top 5 overall priorities. Health and well-being, the gap that rounds out the sector analysis, was a priority for over half of the regions in the scoping study. 6 out of the 20 gaps were not cited by any region in this activity, helping us to narrow the scope of our future research. Outside of the gaps presented here, most other gaps were only cited by between 1 and 3 regions, showing that there may be some need for small localised projects in a few regions. So do we have consensus? The short answer is yes. We never expected to get the same top 5 ranking across each of the sectors and all geographical regions, but we have come close. We have multiple items that consistently rate high, and the rankings point to a need to focus on the complex overlap between student well-being, learning outcomes, and the evaluation of ILEs. However, it is valuable to know where there are differences between sectors. We will continue to explore this as we move forward to refine our focus. Importantly, we feel there's a logical link between these diversities. For example, there's overlap between health and well-being and inclusiveness gaps, and it will be the role of the roundtables to explore these links to negotiate a coherent focus for the major research project we are developing. To revisit our project overview, we are moving towards the end of stage 2. We have completed the initial ideas generation through our first round of analysis and begun to refine and rank these ideas through workshop 2 in order to help us determine areas of consensus. From the analysis presented, a clear mandate is emerging in terms of our priorities. In addition to the team workshop data, we are in the midst of collecting the second Delphi survey responses. Our analysis of Delphi Survey 1 shows good consistency with Workshop 1 data, and our next step is to examine how the Delphi experts rank the 20 gaps before moving into consensus seeking with them. We are building towards the roundtables at the end of the year, where we will focus on our third research question: how should the next stage of research be designed? Prior to this, we will work through a verification process, sharing drafts of the white paper and seeking feedback to refine this document for use at the roundtables. The management team is always here to help. We look forward to discussing the findings with you and working together as we move forward towards the roundtables.
Thank you, Julia. You said that very well, off the cuff. I'll just get rid of that and bring it back to the full screen so we see each other's faces. Look, we've actually watched this video 5 or 6 times, and that doesn't count the time spent in putting it together. So I think for the people in the management team, it holds together. We understand the message, but it's a little bit more difficult, I think, for you guys who've just had 5 minutes hit between the eyes with what was, I suppose, quite a complex piece of analysis. And today is supposed to really be a Q&A and a discussion as opposed to any sort of presentation. So I think I wouldn't mind just opening up right straight away and say to people, what strikes you about what you just heard? Is there anything that sort of stands out as actually being something that's noteworthy, something that's worth making a comment on?
I feel I'm happy to recognize the themes. I feel like this is very rooted in the discussions and that there is a sort of strong direction in this that comes out in this presentation. And I'm also so impressed by the meticulous graphics and the planning. I've noticed all along, of course, but to see it like this, it's unusual to see it so clearly, to have all this effort put into the sort of transparency of the process.
I mean, I would agree, given that that others did the majority of the work in putting this together. So again, thanks to the team. And you're right, is that really the surprise is actually the results as they came out, because there is a clarity and a cohesiveness with the workshop 2 results compared to workshop 1 that we weren't expecting. And I think part of today is actually unpicking that and having a sense of, well, what are the differences that exist and what matters. We are ultimately, if you remember, our ultimate game is to see if we can come up with an agenda for research into the future that has got geographical consistency and has consistency across the sectors of industry, education and academics. I suppose in some ways it's an attempt to put together a coherent agenda for future research rather than each of us going our own ways and doing bits and pieces. So seeing it summarised like that is lovely. It's also important, I think, for us to remember that workshop 1 data was all about frequencies. How many times did people talk about a particular topic? And Chris and Julia and I did a lot of work in coding all of that, and that gave us the 20 research gaps. And then the 20 research gaps came back to you in workshop 2, and it's a totally different set of data because we said rank them, put them in the order if you think the top 5 that ought to be looked at and the bottom 5 should be looked at. And to find that consistency made the presentation of the thing much easier because there's a fairly clear message coming. So, that's sorry, I've just said this is not a lecture, but, it's important, I think, to recognise the fact that we actually have something quite unusual, that we have some consistent data coming out of what should be a really diverse audience, and yet that consistency is coming through. Does anybody else want to comment around those sorts of points?
I just will comment not on the meta structure of the research itself, but just the point about the convergence between inclusivity and student achievement and student well-being. It's very topical for us. We have so it's gratifying to see that coming out, because our reality is that the two are so inextricable. You know, we're dealing with a situation at the moment where we have a transgender student who has moved from our boys' college campus, buildings rather, learning environment, to the girls' learning environment, because the strain on the child of being in a school where they don't identify with that gender was getting too great. And so it's just interesting and reassuring to see that, you know, what we as educators on the ground know is the truth, will be researched in the future, because it's absolutely crucial. Yeah. Thanks.
Julie and Chris, I don't know if you want to make a comment on the way that, you know, the inclusivity, the student well-being, you know, health and well-being, etc., how those things sort of seem to start to converge a bit.
I can give that a go. I think it's one of these things that's probably a task for us at the roundtables to keep working through this. So we had that 20 research gaps document where from that initial lot of coding, we were isolating the gaps, but we noticed that particularly for educators, people are putting both health and well-being and inclusiveness in the top 5 together. And one of the things that we got you to do in workshop 2 was actually write down your reasons for what made it into the top 5 and what made it into the bottom 5. And as we go through those comments, we saw in particular for lots of the educators, it's talking more holistically about the child and saying that actually these things sort of are a package, and that we need to be recognising the diversity of the students that we have in schools. But then also making sure that we're putting their health and well-being at the forefront when we're designing and working in these spaces. So there is becoming this overlap between the two, and I think that's probably part of the challenge for the roundtables, is to think how best can we measure that and research that so that we get that concrete evidence that is really useful in schools and will change policy and practice.
And perhaps a little bit of the struggle we've had in the analysis has been, as time goes by, the things like inclusiveness that merges into health and well-being, or even engagement, that one actually feeds the other. And you can't really see them totally in isolation. So it is one of the things, Adrienne, that we need to look at when we go to do further research, the degree to which we unpack this or conflate them, put them together. Yeah, no, it's a good point. What about anybody else? Sorry? Yeah.
Yes, could I just finish that train of thought? So I'm interested whether your research will also get data from any of the students in any of the learning environments, because my experience is when we asked the students, we were busy redesigning one of our classroom sets here, and we thought, let's ask the students what they want. We used a sort of design thinking approach, and it was astonishing the richness of the information they had, which we then passed on to our architects, and they said, we're blown away by what your students have actually come up with. We also coded it and that sort of a thing. So for me, asking the students what they want is also really important. Thanks.
We sort of nominally gave the future research that title of student experience for that reason. We've done a lot of work as a group of researchers and allied industries and educators around the world looking at ILESE. The struggle, the new horizon, the new struggle is actually getting genuine student thoughts and needs into what we design and how we put it into place, and the curriculum gets enacted in it. So, yeah, we think that the opinions of students is critical. More importantly, I think for me personally, is understanding how each of these students own and occupy these spaces, and it differs child by child. And how do we account for that within what we do and the research we do? So it's a huge challenge, and it's interesting the data really is supporting that concept quite strongly. Yeah, but there's 2 streams, I would say anyway, and please Chris or Julia or Kelly jump in, Ramon, if you disagree with me, but there's 2 streams. One is there is a need, people are saying we need data, we need information to be able to drive what we do, we need proof, I suppose. And the other part of it is we need to know about that much more affective side of it. You know, what are the experiences? What's actually happening in reality? And it's a matter of trying somehow to merge those two together, which I find interesting in the listings that we've got. I don't know, does anyone want to comment on that? I'll shut up again.
I can see it, ILE Finland with a hand up.
Oh, yes. Yes, please, Tina.
Okay, well, I thought maybe, can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe I'm repeating a bit what you've been discussing already, but I was really happy about this health and well-being results, because I was also wondering, this is kind of this Nordic thing, welfare states, and you know that we always talk about well-being, but I can see it's really global need, and I don't know, maybe pandemic also put us to think of that, but and the whole relation between learning and well-being, where we can't learn if we're not well, and we can learn how to improve our well-being. And so I think this is very centric, and that we could think of the future research focusing only on that. And there's a huge need. I think it's also acknowledged everywhere that the teachers and students and families and everybody's well-being is now, we need some research and actions to recover it. We are all a little bit down after a while during the pandemic, and so I was happy about that result. It really justifies that type of research and action. Yeah,
and Tina, the researchers amongst us look at this and shiver in fear a little bit at the thought of how do we tackle such a big topic, health and well-being. I mean, there are empirical ways of doing it, but actually we're much more interested in the much more effective. So it's going to be, for the roundtables, a very interesting job to say, okay, how do we unpack this into tangible research? But that's what we're leading towards. That's why we're having these discussions and why we're collecting this data. Now, the roundtables will be where this collective group, you know, echoes what you're saying and then moves it to the next step of saying, well, actually, research probably needs to look like this, this, and this. Yeah. Bodil, did you want to either add to that, or did you have another?
I actually have another couple of questions. I'm just a little bit curious about how you're going to use these top themes. As I understand, there's going to be some sort of in the white paper pointing at themes for a larger application, but is it also going to point to regional themes for smaller applications for the regions to pursue?
Chris or Julie, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer?
Wes, I'm happy for you to answer that. I think I could give the short answer, which is yes. I think we can't deny putting in that more fine-grained analysis about what has come up as sort of those top 5 for particular regions. And I certainly see that, you know, collaboration on smaller projects. There are some areas of need, and then a lot that, as you can see, we're sort of 8 out of the 10 regions are saying that this is an area of interest for them. That certainly is probably going to be wrapped up within a bigger project, but Wes, I can let you talk about that.
Yeah, I think what the management team is discussing at some length, and it's early yet because we are still drafting up the white paper to present at the round table. But Bodil, it does have to be some sort of cohesive way of putting together this on 2 streams, we think. The first stream has to be a very general international study that collects data around the critical topics here, and the roundtables will be the ones to help us to refine what that looks like. And then from that international scope, we call that probably the umbrella project. And then within that, I imagine we'll end up forming 2 or 3 hubs, which will seek and try to find substantial funding to do much more in depth from that data, but particular to their region, the stuff that's actually particular to what they need to find. I know that sounds really broad and very grand, but you know what, we've never actually achieved anything unless we try big, and I think the time is right for it. Yeah, Chris, did you have anything you want to say about that?
No, I think that's really accurate, and you know, the timing is right. It's really interesting to see how much consensus there is across all of the data. not only in the things that people agree on, but also in the, what you saw there was flashes of the sort of top 5 rankings, but we've also established the sort of the bottom 5 ones. COVID is overwhelmingly the the lowest of those, but also there was really strong, strong consistency in those lower ones. And yes, there are some other sort of bits of data that spring out as being interesting in different parts of the world, and of particular interest. But as we've heard tonight, things like well-being and engagement and sort of affective domains are certainly coming up as of global importance and of global interest.
And it's also of interest when we look at it, Bodil, the way that there is strong consistency. But if you look at the things up at the moment, the range on the right shows you the topics that actually have the big difference between, or the size of the difference between the 3 sectors. So you look at effective learning outcomes, almost everybody sees that as being an important topic. And then you look at impact on student engagement, and the range is wider there. So there are some things that some sectors will prefer over others, and there are some things that although the regions, I think, Julia, tend to be fairly consistent. So, but we never expect to get anywhere near the closeness that we've that we've found here with this. So it is going to be a challenge to put it together into cohesive research, but that's part of the job that we do as a collective. Yeah, Adrienne, you had your hand up a little while ago. Did you want to ask a question still, or?
Sorry, Wesley, you're speaking to me now.
There was, I thought Adrienne, or was it Adrienne? Somebody had their hand up, and yep. Go ahead.
Thanks, Wesley. I'm good, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to make a comment about the rankings? Yeah. Adrienne, were you going to say something?
This is
sorry,
Finland, or
okay, can we comment from Finland about this ranking a little bit? But I'm also, of course, from industrial point of view, it looks really great that we have got like this top 5. Our opinion really clearly true. But how about educators? What are the top? We have one. No, the second is like the impact of student engagement is there, but I'm a little bit worried about this educators' view here.
I'll just see if I can pull up the educator list just there for a sec. Sorry, I have to. I'm not able to go through this easily, but it is an interesting point because the educators are the ones who came out with quite different. Julia, what have I done?
If you just scroll, like fast forward a little bit, the 2 screens from now, okay. One of the things, the reason why educators looks a bit different in that top overall ranking was that we had to weight the sectors. We were really aware that we wanted each sector to have an equal voice, and we actually just had a much greater proportion of educators within this workshop, and it started sort of skewing the results of the top 5 overall. Which is why you see that some of their rankings that are slightly lower are the ones that, once it balances out with the other sectors, have come into the overall top 5. So for educators, the student engagement and the health and wellbeing is certainly still there, as well as the evaluation. But the thing that was particularly different for them was the academic learning outcomes. They were the only sector to really put that in first, and for it to be in the top 5. But the reasoning for that was primarily given by educators was that they're saying that from an education department perspective, the people are investing big money in these builds, and yet that's sort of the golden question is, do they work to improve students' performance and to justify that that expenditure in building innovative learning environments? So that tended to be the reason it was given for being in the being their first priority. Yeah.
Bodil.
I think.
Sorry. Yeah, Bodil.
And Terry.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because I find it really interesting that, for example, the design of learning environments that's ranked as the 9th on the 9th level by educators. I'm just wondering whether that has to do with that they still don't see the connection between design and practice as something that's an interplay, but see it as two separate things. If that's sort of an how do you say, if that points to this still being two different silos, or.
I think one of the reasons is if you sort of unpack what's involved in that design of ILESE, it's about evaluation of effectiveness and the impact of particular qualities of design, etc. And I quite understand why that's obviously very high in the industry rankings and lower in the education. You're right, it's quite low in the education, but it's almost like it's one of those cases where people say, if you're going to evaluate ILEs, you're already evaluating the room anyway, the spaces anyway as part of that. And it was that sort of slight distinction or difference between the educators and the designers. But I mean, the design of ILEs, was 2nd or 3rd overall. It's a very strong area. People want more empirical data about the way that the designs actually literally work or don't work. It's obvious that people feel like we still don't know that well enough. There has been a lot of work done on it, particularly through IEQs and that sort of work. And yet industry still want more data to be able to help them in driving forward the design qualities. So I'm pleased that it's in there, because we need to have that balance between, learning outcomes and the design. And I don't know if anyone else noticed, but the teaching has disappeared. That whole quality of teaching has disappeared out of the top 5 where it was there earlier. And again, I think it's probably because it's become consumed within, wrapped up within student engagement, things like that. The teaching has to be part of that, so therefore it's already covered. Yeah.
Wes, could I just follow that comment on? Is that okay?
Please, Terry, yes.
In terms of what Bodhi has just said, I think the issue for many teachers, it's about politics with a small p. The fact that we know, with all the things we look at and all of us get involved with, that teachers in many countries face an uphill struggle on the basis that they, in order to demonstrate the value of rethinking space, they have to actually be supported by evidence that says it will improve learning outcomes. And I think, therefore, that the challenge, and I can't speak for other countries, but I can speak for those countries I work in, and which is many, is that there's still a traditionalism about, is it going to make a difference if we develop these spaces and these activities to improve well-being, all those things. And I think teachers fall at the first hurdle often because of the politics of it, and therefore they need to see that actually it is going to make a difference. The evidence supports it's going to make a difference, so they can use that themselves to upskill themselves, to get into a debate where they can bring all the other things together and feel part of the argument and part of the debate. Because, say, for example, in the UK, the teacher unions have given up talking about learning outcomes in space because there's not the information there to help them demonstrate that thinking differently about space and well-being and movement and activity and valuing students is going to lead to improved learning outcomes. So all I'm just saying is, I think that's why educators would say this is really good, and you know where I come from on this, but that's the first thing. Unless we can demonstrate that, in many cases, not much else is likely politically to follow. And obviously, in local areas, and schools can do their own things like all of us do to make a difference. So we know, we can see that it works. So I think that's the reason why that is, and from my point of view, this project needs to get and to help teachers understand that these things are important, they are of value, they're internationally accepted, and they will make a real difference for the lives of young people in the future. So, that's a long answer, but that's why I think it goes at the top.
No, I totally agree with what you said. And Chris, you've got a response to that?
Yeah, and I think just picking up from a couple of points, I think one of the things that's of interest is around teachers and the way teachers are responding to this, because often teachers did seem to be the outliers, is thinking about what teachers believe that they have control over or have sort of efficacy around. And for some teachers feel like the the learning environment and the design of the learning environment is something that's happened already, or it's about to happen, and that they've got more sort of stronger interest in things like well-being, and more immediate things like sort of the learner agency that they feel they have some control over pedagogically, or some input into, and often whereas the building may maybe less so. Yeah, so just a wondering anyway.
We're always going to come up against the same issue, but from 3 different perspectives. Now, academics want to be able to design projects that will actually are reasonable and you can get good results from it. Educators want to know much more about, this is my world, I live within it, what should I know about it and how can I use it better? And designers are very keen. When I say designers, I mean everybody in the industry, people who provide all the infrastructure, want to know, how can we actually make sure our product is getting the effect that it's supposed to get? In a way, the roundtables are becoming increasingly important, because the conversation we're having at the moment will happen in a probably more structured way, and certainly a way that's actually catalogued in order to bring that finer tuning to the broad picture of any projects that probably should run. So I know there's a lot of work happening in the chat room. I don't suppose anybody, Julia or Chris, have you been monitoring that by any chance? It's got away from me a bit. Is there anything in there that you think should be brought to the front? Sorry,
I think no, that's okay. Chris and I have been busily typing back where we can as well. I think we've covered most things, but I think the only point that hasn't sort of been brought back again is co-design. That sort of seems to be cropping up through lots of people's comments, and Ramon's just popped one as well, that importance of getting teachers and pupils together, and actually having that meaningful collaboration around the design of spaces. And I think, Kevin, you put in a comment as well around the importance of leadership to really drive that vision. And I think that's another thing that we're noticing in that data, is sort of that interplay between what happens locally within particular schools where people do feel that they have agency and sort of control over their local environment, and then how do we actually start bringing that together to bring about that broader systemic change. And that's been something really interesting in the data as well, about trying to balance those 2 different types of needs. And whereas I think that probably comes back to your point about how we organise research as well for the future.
I think, Julia, yeah, having that local agency is really important, but I think it needs to be within the context of the kind of overall strategic or national framework. Because here in Scotland, I think it's really interesting how things have changed over the last 10 years or so. So when we get a brief, we get, here is the budget, here is the overall area. It's entirely up to you as designers how you deliver the educational environment. So we have enormous flexibility, and therefore, working with really good clients. And to me, that is the key. A really good brief from a really good client is the number one thing, because you can then have the opportunity to really be as innovative as you can. And part of that is absolutely speaking to pupils and to teachers to get the best possible environment. So I think there's a lot of good stuff in the Scottish sector, and I'm sure it must be, I imagine, even better in other places like Scandinavia, where we can call on all we can demonstrate through innovative learning environments what the benefits are, particularly from more abstract things like creating joy. If you feel good going to school, then you're going to be in a much better position to learn, aren't you? So you guys will know better than me in terms of how you sort of explore that academically and sort of present it, because it's quite an abstract concept, isn't it? But I was really struck the last time we visited a school with Doe, how that sense of kind of happiness. I mean, to be a bit naive about it, that sense of happiness that was really tangible in the building had a very positive impact on learning, I thought.
And it is a very sorry.
That's right. I think Tina just wants to speak. I can see a finished team at the computer.
Tina, go. No, okay, she's just organising things.
Yeah, no worries. I'm not jumping anywhere. Okay. Yeah, we can see the chat, so we were curious of seeing the chat at the same time, and I don't know how to put it. So just keep on going.
We'll keep going. I'm going to put Julia on the spot a little bit, just again, because she handles it so well. We're talking in a very interesting way about the nuances around the data we collected. We want to acknowledge the fact there is another set of data that's been collected, and rather than just ignore it totally, at least give you a briefing on the role that that's playing in helping us refine these ideas further. So, Julie, I don't know how much of the Delphi progress you want to discuss or put forward at the moment, and probably more the role that Delphi is playing in helping us to steer ways forward.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I don't think I've got much that's sort of interesting to say at this point in time. The first round of the Delphi has come in and it was analysed, and we've reported back sort of through the newsletters a bit about that. So again, we were really pleased with the consistency that was coming out, the same sorts of issues that you identified in workshop 1 as research gaps also came out of the Delphist comments. So that's always really nice. It gives us a separate sample of people that are saying largely the same thing. And we, I think one of the things that we noticed is that they had even sort of more references to build on. And that's one of the things that we're working through as a management team, is sort of creating that repository of all the literature that people are using and citing at the moment. So we're continuing to work on that. Bodil, I see your question about the questions in the Delphi survey. They were actually the same as the workshop questions. So that was that's part of the reason why we're running these in parallel. So they got asked the same broad questions that you got asked in workshop 1. And they've then responded exactly the same way through sort of that type form survey. That's their second survey in terms of ranking the questions. So we really do, our aim anyway is that it's going to give us some comparative data because you're responding to the same types of things. But their survey in terms of ranking is actually closing on Friday. I've just given that little extra bit of time into September, knowing that many of the experts who are in the Northern Hemisphere are just returning from leave. And so it'll be our job in the next few weeks to see whether their actual rankings are the same as what we're presenting in this video from the teams.
It's one of the really interesting parts of this project is having these two quite separate bodies of people providing data using the same questions. And arguably the Delphists are the experts amongst the experts. I mean, you guys are all experts in your field, and we've nominated these people as actually being the ones who are really good at a particular thing. So we're going to get a much more, in fact, we found, I think, in the first round of analysis of the Delphi data that the issues were less, but they were much more refined. Would that be right, Julia? The responses, Julie and Chris?
Yes, we didn't come up with any new research gaps, but there were sort of nuances sort of that sit within those sub-themes that came out particularly. I mean, as you would expect, probably with the Delphists, where they're commenting based on sort of their deep expertise in a narrow field. That has made that really interesting data to analyse.
And that's going to come through well in the roundtables, you know, where we be able to bring. We're not actually giving you the results of the Delphi study until the roundtables. We're keeping that as a separate piece of analysis, just so it doesn't interfere with our thinking as the workshop group. Yeah, Chris, were you going to say something? Did I interrupt? Sorry.
Wesley, and this is Tina for real.
Oh, Tina, hello.
And no, just as a group, we were not very. We didn't understand how the Delphi participants were selected in the end, because we kind of lost that part, like because we gave the list of names, and so how and who are the participants in the end. So if you can just mention something about it, like, and the representation where they come from, and so
I think Chris was the sampling guru on this, weren't you, Chris? We had a separate panel do it, but Chris looked after that panel.
Yeah, we did. So we essentially all of the different teams, you know, our 19-20 teams around the world all put in nominations for people, and we went through those very thoroughly, and the subcommittee sort of set up a sort of a ranking system, if you like, based on kind of expertise and their you know, people's participants' impact and sort of global impact as well as national impact. And then essentially from that we then pulled out a list of people to approach, and we went through a couple of cycles of that. The inherently with the Delphi server, those people remain anonymous through the process. So we won't ever, whilst we can publish the findings from that, we won't ever, we won't be sort of making public who those people were. But certainly the caliber and quality of those people was outstanding. You know, is outstanding of those people that came up. Yeah.
Was there like a, I don't know, geographic, did you check the geographical representation and this kind of criteria that they represent?
Yeah, so geographical and gender as well. And then we had the kind of our three categories, so academic, industry, education. And so, you know, there was a good cross section from all of those. And really, actually the gender split was pretty 50-50 as well. By the time that got, obviously that doesn't account for who actually responds and who stays in the process. So one of the challenging things about the Delphi process is actually maintaining engagement with people. And because it is a process that goes through, you know, 2 or 3 or possibly even 4 cycles. So yeah, that will be interesting data to reflect on as we know. I think the process itself is quite an interesting process to reflect on, and I think probably what's really powerful. I think had we, you know, one way of doing the project would have just been to do that. Whereas I think what we've gained, you know, we've gained immeasurably from having these sort of, you know, 20 teams around the world and going through a similar process. And I think I think the 2 processes in parallel will produce really, really rich findings.
And I think, given the time, what I might do is I might very quickly, first of all, pass over to Kelly, whose job it is try to manage the organisation of the roundtables. And Kelly, did you want to mention to everyone while we still got them here? Because even though we're coming up to 7, I'm happy to stay around longer, but some people will have to go at 7. Kelly, did you want to mention anything?
Yeah, there's started to be some questions coming through about booking the actual logistics of the roundtables. So totally different topic to what you've all been discussing. I will be sending out emails in the next 24 hours to team leaders from each of the teams involved in the Copenhagen roundtables at the end of November. All team members are welcome. We will be funding 1 team member from each team to come to Copenhagen, and other team members, if they wanted to self-fund and attend, they are also welcome. The way the schedule's setting up at the moment, the Monday afternoon will be a talk from Julia and Wes. That is optional, don't need to attend to that part, but obviously very welcome, and you definitely all should attend that part also. And then most of the roundtable program will take place on the Tuesday and then into the Wednesday morning. So I will send emails regarding sort of the logistics of that, yeah, as I said, in the next 24 hours. They're probably the main things for me at this stage, and then I can sort of work with questions on an individual basis, because I think different teams will have different needs around that. Yeah.
All right, that's good. Thank you, Kelly. And yeah, just so you know, the stuff will be going on the web soon, but we're working very hard to try to condense it all. You know, in Australia, we're having 3 events rather than 1. And Bodil is organising the talk and then a school visit before and after. So it takes a little bit of time to organise, but we're trying hard to get stuff on the web so people can go in and click and book. But Kelly is there always to answer your queries about it. To be honest, we have, I think, 4 teams or 5 teams. So we expect 4 or 5 people, but actually we'd love to see 20 people. It's no problem at all. So feel free to invite colleagues along who might be able to contribute to that. We are actually saving the chat because it's a very rich chat. There's another whole line of conversation happening beside what we talk about here, but spreading out from it. And I'm sorry we haven't been able to read everything out and then answer it, because actually online the screen stuff is happening as well. So we will save the chat, and also this. I forgot to ask your permission at the start to record it. I just click the button, and we have been recording it. And unless anybody's got any problems with that, we will turn this into a video and put on the website. The recording from the first regional Zoom, which is the Australasian one, which Chris hosted, is up there for you to look at if you would like to see it. I think
just quickly,
in
regards to the chat, just an opportunity that might be there. There are the channels over Twitter and LinkedIn if anyone wants to take any of these conversations across to those platforms too. It might be a really good place to sort of continue on with some of these conversations. So yeah, just a suggestion or a thought there as well.
I think the tweeting is a really good idea, and it seems to be getting some momentum up. This is something we released in one of the newsletters, and be aware we are sending newsletters out fortnightly, and they are available on the web, and it is actually our way of communicating with you the most efficient way that we can. This was one we put up a couple of newsletters ago, which helps you to understand the way that we're putting together the data in terms of reporting back to you. We've already done that green one at the top, the major report, and that's actually available both as a PDF, a nice looking PDF, and it's also possible, obviously, to download and print. So that's available. The rankings that we just talked about now, Julia and Chris and I with Kelly are putting together a minor report on that. That will be available soon, and again, it'll be posted online, but it covers material that you saw in quick summary provided by Julia in the video. The Delphi 1, 2, and 3, and it may be Delphi 4, but we don't think that will happen. Those 3 are being kept separate, and they'll be put into a minor report that will then be fed into the draft round white table and the round tables. We will have a workshop before the round table with your teams, and the idea of that is to present with you our very first layer of thinking around what we might do with all of this data. We want to get some feedback on the big picture stuff before we put it into the draft of the white paper. And that will be given in those roundtables in November. And then from that, we will refine it further to finally publish that white paper in February. We'll have a final regional Zoom in February to be able to feedback overall and to say, well done on this phase of the project. And hopefully by then, particularly from the roundtables, we get a sense of, is there life after ILESE scoping study? Is there the consensus to put forward the major international set of research that addresses the issues the way that people have been outlining it? So that's all to come. And the other thing we want to very quickly show you was, and it's just disappeared off my thing, but I'll bring it up. The timeline we know about, we've discussed it, etc. But even so, we're around about here at the moment. We are running a little bit behind, but it's not of great concern to us. But we have got a flurry coming up. And I just emphasise the fact that while as a group we're not getting together much because we had a workshop way over there and we have the next workshop just before the regionals roundtables. During this time, actually, a lot of work now is being done by the management team in the analysis of the data, the development of the white paper. And we're also starting to think through that big picture. What is that big research? Because we want to have something that's reasonably okay to look at by the time we get to the November roundtables. So having said all of that, a big thank you to everybody for coming for the European Regional Zoom. I'm happy to stay around and have a talk with people if they have got other things they'd like to bring up. The next time we get together, we'll actually be workshop 3. And leading up to that, then we'll be doing quite a bit of work and getting stuff together. But workshop 3 is when we will next have a chat, and then not long after that, we'll see you all. I'm thoroughly looking forward to Copenhagen. We'll see you at the roundtables in Copenhagen, you and any of your colleagues that you feel might be able to make it. Julie and Chris, did you want to say any last hurrahs? Jack, Kelly?
Not for me.
Just thanks everyone for the engagement, and the conversation's been really valuable, and the chat's been great. So yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, so given the hour's up, I'll say goodbye, but I'll hang around for a minute in case anybody does want to have a chat about it in particular. Other than that, we'll see you soon, and keep checking those newsletters. Okay.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.